Back with you. Thanks for staying on tonight here on In Focus. Now, a report compiled by a survey group suggests that the ANC is most likely to fall below the 50% mark in the 2024 general elections. It further found that all other political parties have their work cut out to impress voters to come out in their numbers as they position themselves as alternatives. Ipsos Sub-Saharan Africa says its survey was structured as a measure of the current political sentiment and not in any way a prediction. Joining us now to explain their methodology is Ipsos Sub-Saharan Africa Knowledge Director for Public Affairs, Marie Harris. Marie, good evening. Thank you very much for your time and for joining us tonight here on In Focus. Let's get straight into that methodology. First and foremost, the sample that you pulled out, how does it work? And I see here you say it represents all those eligible to vote, which are in the region of 40 million. Now, you've got 3,600 people picked randomly. How do you come to the conclusion that this would certainly be a representative of the electorate?
You know, one of the big requirements of doing a proper study is if you can do the study so that it is representative of what your universe is. I'm first going to give you an example, and then I'm going to explain to you how we do it. It is a little bit like your cup of coffee. You have coffee in your cup, you have some milk, you might have some sugar, and you take your first sip out of your cup, or your second or your 10th sip, doesn't matter. But that sip of coffee that you take, you know it's coffee that you are drinking. It's representative of your whole cup of coffee. A sample works exactly the same. The sample we draw is that sip of coffee. It's representative of the whole. So let me explain the detail to you. We look at the country as a whole. The people or the number of people living in every province. We then stratify the sample by province, then by the types of settlement in the province. Like, for instance, in a metropolitan area, you will do more interviews than in a rural area. It has a fancy name. You work out the probability proportionate to size, but you don't need to remember that necessarily. The big thing is that the interviews are spread all over the country, even into deep rural areas. Yeah. And then there are some certain instructions that the interviewers follow, choosing a sampling point according to instructions, then at the sampling point choosing a house, and then in the house choosing one person to speak to. And they have to go back 3 times to get that particular person to speak to. They can't just switch like they want to, or change, or go somewhere else. There are instructions for every eventuality. In the end, it gives you that sip of coffee, the sample you draw. It's representative of the country as a whole. And we interview people from the age of 15 to as old as they come. The big thing is when we look at political results, we usually filter the results by those who are 18 years and older because they are people eligible to vote.
That's right.
You use those same words. But it's also very important to look at the younger people because in a lot of instances in 2 years' time, 2024, they are going to be voters. So now already we want to start making a picture in our heads of what are the things that are important to them, okay. What makes them tick, how do they look like in terms of demographic features and all those sorts of things.
So, well, one would firstly ask, how often do you get it right? For example, you did predict, for example, a decline in the ANC support in the local government elections in certain municipalities, yes, in particular. But how often do you get it right? I mean, what is the margin of error? Is it error really, or just the margin of being precise?
Okay, the margin of, I will read to you some of the results. The margin of error on this particular study is between 0.5 and 1.67%. So in 95 out of 100 cases, we will be within 1.67% of the actual findings of the survey. And we are quite often right.
Yeah.
Or as right as we can be. It's actually quite amazing how close you can be with doing a survey like this. And as I said to you, the big thing is how you do the study. It is not so much, it's also important how you ask the question, how you go about it and all those things. But I think the drawing of your sample is probably the most important bit.
Yeah. How informative is it, though? Because the elections are probably still, a couple of months away, maybe if not 18 months.
18 months away,
yeah. So, Paul Mashatile, if you ask him, he'll tell you that, there are some already predicting less than 50%. But we are renewing ourselves. Councillors go back to the ground. We've already won some by-elections. This is looking good for the ANC. We can turn this around. How informative is this particular sample?
I think it's extremely informative because, especially to political parties, because they use information like this to do exactly what you are saying, Paul Mashatile said, to go back and say we need to reform ourselves. We need to make new plans. We need to look at strategies how to do this. I don't believe by-elections is a very good predictor of a national election. In a lot of cases, in by-elections, people will vote differently from what they vote in a national election. It's a safer environment to basically express your anger at the party or something like that. You stay away or you don't vote for the party or something like that. There's much less at stake. But in a national election, you won't do that. In a national election, you will vote for the party you believe is the right one. So I think it's extremely good for political parties to get a regular update of how things are in the country. And they get an independent voice, which is not, it's a bad thing if you start believing your own propaganda.
Yeah,
so
certainly.
Exactly. So it's a good thing that you actually have an independent voice and that can tell you how do people in the country think and feel. What are the things that are important to them? What do they want you to do as a political leader? What do they want you to change before the election?
Now, Marie, you say there is an indication, and you tell me how you get to that there is latent support for the opposition parties, but the challenge is for them to turn that latent support into actual votes. So how do you establish this latent support?
Okay, that's actually a totally different question from the straightforward question, which party would you vote for? You ask a different question about how do you feel about the party. It is not, and then every person in the interview expresses their view about 6 or 7 or 8 parties that are the biggest parties in the country. And you look at those results to see whether people will reject the party completely or whether they feel they might not vote for the party, but they feel warm towards this party, or they feel they might probably vote for this party. You see, it's far more of a feelings question than a question of which party would you vote for. And the other point is that we do these studies at least twice a year, these big face-to-face interviews, projects with face-to-face interviews. In election years, we do them more often, but it is good to have that measurement, like every 6 months. You can see how things change. And I know if I look back to the history of all the questions that we have asked over time, we have seen this before the 2019 national elections, that a party like the DA was measuring at about 14% round there. In the end, they got more than that. what it shows to me, and what we could also see from the results, is that there's a group of people who are very devoted to the DA. And then there's another group of people who vote DA in the end, but they're not necessarily so committed and devoted to the DA. They would rather tell you, I'm not sure, I will decide when I get in the voting booth, and, so on. So they have these two different types of voters. A party like the EFF have strong support amongst young people, students, and they have strong support amongst workers, guys like mine workers, factory workers, and so on. Again, you have this duality in the party, and you need to understand who are the people who will vote for this party, where do they come from, and then you can actually see how things develop. And that's where that statement of mine comes from, to say that there's latent support for both the EFF and the DA.
Now, your statement also says you would be positively, or maybe not so, but you'll be greatly surprised if the ANC made it over the 50% mark. What about the devoted ANC voter? I mean, are you getting a sense that they are now finding a credible alternative? Are they going for the other options? Or is it just a case that the ANC, as it is right now, they are still not convinced that they will get out of their homes and go and vote?
A lot of the ANC has a very hardcore of support, as you know and as I know. But there are a lot of people who are disappointed. And they say, well, whether they vote or not, it's not going to make a difference. The ANC will win anyway. And if you look at the picture of South Africa, the ANC is the biggest party in this country. There's no two ways about it. They definitely will win the next election. The question that we all speculate about is by what margin they will win. And a lot of people stayed away with the 2016 local government election. I think the ANC got quite a fright after that local government election. They worked very hard with the 2019 election to get people back to go and vote. A lot of people went back and voted ANC. They got still more than 50%, 56% or something was the count. But then in the local government election last year, for the first time they fell, if you look at it on a national basis, under the 50%. We're currently measuring them under the 50%, quite far, 42%. I'm not saying that will be their result in 18 months' time. A lot of things can happen. And we need to make different calculations closer to the election. You have to look at those people who are registered, those people who say they are going to vote. But I think they will probably, I'm not putting my head on a block, but they will get more than 42, but I don't know whether they will get to 50%.
Marie Harris, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming on. Ipsos Sub-Saharan Africa Director there, Marie Harris, on the latest survey that they've conducted on the political sentiment in the country.